Hi everyone, welcome back. Today we are solving the delete columns to make sorted 2. So in this problem, we will be given an array of n strings called strs, and they are all the same length. And our goal is to make all the strings in this array to be sorted lexicographically. And if they are not sorted lexicographically, then we will have to remove some characters. And when we remove them, they all have to be from the same index. And our goal is to return the minimum possible number of removals to make them all be sorted lexicographically. So if we look at this example, if we remove the first letter from each string, then it will be sorted as ABC. In the second example, X, Y, and Z is already sorted, so we don't need to remove any strings. And in this example, we will have to delete every column because none of these letters are sorted, whether it's in the first letter, second letter, or third letter. They're both not sorted lexicographically, so we will have to delete every column. So now that we have seen some examples, let's get to how we can solve this problem. So for this problem, we can approach the inputs as rows and columns. So this would be a row and this would be a column. Now you may think that once we see a column that is in order, then we can return true. So for example, right here, X, Y, and Z, that's in order. So then you may think that we don't need to delete anything else afterwards because it wouldn't matter since these have the priority, but that's not always the case. And a counterexample would be right here, X, X, Y, Z, even though that is in order, but if we look, C comes after B. So just because the first column is in order, that doesn't mean we're done. So one way we can cover this edge case is we can use a settled array, and it will basically tell us that at that index, if it is settled, then we will set to true. So for example, right here, if V and Z, we know that V comes before Z, so we know that at this row it will be settled, so we can change this to true when we see that happen. So let's go over this example real quick. So at the first index, it's in order, so we don't need to increment the result, but V comes before Z, so we can change this to true since this row has been settled. Now we go to the next column. D comes before E, that's fine. E comes before V, that is fine, but V comes after L, so that's false. So now we need to increment the result by 1 because we need to delete this column. And we come to the last column. We see that Y comes before I, so we also need to delete this column, so we increment to 2. And let's say this was in order, so let's say maybe this is A, for example. Now this would still be valid that I comes after C because V comes before Z, so we have this settled here to let us know. But anyways, for this example, the result would be 2 because we need to delete the last 2 columns for it to be sorted lexicographically. So the time complexity would be O of n times m, where n is number of rows and m is number of columns because that's the number of characters that we will have to iterate through. And the space complexity would be O of n because this settled array depends on the number of rows in the input. So now let's get to the coding part. So first we can set the settled array. Can do false times the length of strs and initialize result to 0. Now we will look through the column in range of the length of the first string. Now ordered would be true. We will assume it's ordered in the beginning. And now we will look at each row. So if we check each character, if that row is not settled yet, and the letter at that column, at that row is larger than the following row, then we will have to change order to false and increment the result by 1. And we can break out of the for loop since we already found out that it is not ordered. Now, if it is ordered, then we need to update the settled row. So for row and range length of strings -1, if that row is less than the following row, then we can change the settle of that row to true. And if it is equal, then we don't set it to true yet because it's still not settled. But if it's less than, then we put it to true. And finally, we can return the result. And let's see if it works. Okay, perfect. Hope this was helpful. Thank you for watching. If you have any other questions or comments, feel free to leave them in the comment section, and I hope to see you all again soon.